Hello everyone! Today, I will be going over 20.1 viruses. I will explain what are viruses, how viruses reproduce, and finally, how viruses cause infections. Firstly, we want to know what are they composed of. Well, they are non-living particles that are made of proteins, nucleic acids, and sometimes lipids. And there's only one way a virus can reproduce, which is by infecting other living cells. And to understand how they can infect other living cells and reproduce, we have to know the structure and the composition of viruses. They differ widely in terms of sizes and structures. For example, we have the T4 bacteriophage. Please note that viruses that infect bacteria are called bacteriophages, which is the literal meaning of bacteria eaters. And the tobacco mosaic virus. If we took notice of the virus body, we will notice little things that are pointing out. That is called the capsid. It is basically a protein coat surrounding the virus. Some viruses, such as the influenza virus right here, have an additional membrane that surrounds the capsid. For a virus to be able to enter a host cell, most viruses have proteins on their surface membrane. Those viruses trick the host cell so it would take in the virus, or at least its genetic material. Once the virus is inside the cell, the viral gene will be expressed and it may destroy the cell. Now, you may be wondering, what happens after the virus infects a cell? Viruses' only mission after invading a cell is to make multiple copies of themselves. They use their own genetic material to reproduce inside that living cell. For example, we have the lytic infection and the lysogenic infections. In a lytic infection, a virus, just like our previous example, we have the T4 bacteriophage, will sit on the surface of the host cell, of course with the help of the proteins on the bacteriophage surface. The virus will inject its own DNA into the cell and begins to make messenger RNA from the viral genes. The viral mRNA will later on be translated into viral proteins and nucleic acid. They will work on chopping the cell's DNA. The proteins and the nucleic acid will assemble into new viruses, and finally, the viral enzymes will lyse out of the bacterium cell wall, so they will escape. Similar to that, we have the lysogenic infection. The viral DNA will insert itself into the bacterial chromosome, where it's called a prophage. This prophage will replicate with the bacterium for many generations, and nothing will happen until it decides to exit the bacterium and enter the lytic infection cycle. Then the cycle of the lytic infection will repeat and more viruses will reproduce and escape from the cell. We will take a closer look at two RNA viruses. It is important to know about RNA viruses because about 70% of the viruses contain RNA rather than DNA. Our first example is the common cold. What happens when you get a cold? The capsid will settle on a protein and makes plenty copies of the viral RNA. The copies are translated into the host cell into new viral parts. Those parts will assemble into new viruses and burst from the cell. Our second example will be HIV. It is a deadly disease which is called acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. This disease is caused by a specific RNA virus called human immunodeficiency. This virus belongs to a particular group of RNA viruses called retroviruses. They are considered very different from the rest because their genetic information is copied from RNA to DNA instead of the opposite. One important difference between HIV and the virus that causes the common cold is that HIV makes a DNA copy of itself that inserts into the host DNA. There, it may remain inactive for many cycles. So first, a DNA copy of the viral RNA is made. The copy will be inserted into the host genome. It will later be transcribed and translated into new viral parts, and those parts will assemble into new viruses and burst from the host cell. Finally, we will compare the differences between the viruses and cells. For the structure of viruses, the DNA or the RNA is contained within a capsid, some even with an envelope. For the cell, it has a cell membrane, a cytoplasm. Eukaryotes also contain nucleus and many other organelles. For the reproduction of viruses, they can only reproduce within a host cell. And for the cell, they have independent cell division, either sexually or asexually. For the genetic code of viruses, they have either DNA or RNA, and for the cell, they only contain DNA. There is no growth and development for viruses, but for cells, they do grow and develop in multicellular organisms, for example. Cell increase in number and differentiate. Viruses do not obtain and use energy, but cells do. Viruses also do not respond to environment while cells do. Viruses and cells will change over time. So, the summary of our lesson: viruses reproduce by infecting living cells. Some viruses replicate immediately, others initially persist in an inactive state within the host. We discussed two types of virus infections: the lytic infection and the lysogenic infection. Thank you for listening. This is the end of our lesson.